There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Like I said, my name is Thomas Kreke, and I'm with IDEM. That's supposed to say Office of Land Quality at the top. That's somehow come out in different script. So don't know what that says. So okay. So goal for my discussion this morning is just going to give a broad overview of the how and the why of the permitting program for anaerobic digesters and the resulting land application of the residuals that result from the land application from anaerobic digesters. And for that aim, we'll go over some of the how IDEM is organized, the purpose of the rule, the difference between biomass and appropriate feedstock, determinations of permit types, and then what is the process for the registration process, and then what is the process for land application permitting. There we go. So I find it's often advantageous to discuss how the IDEM is organized for people, especially outside of IDEM, to know where our permitting program lives in the whole organization of IDEM. It's almost, I think we're close to 800 people at IDEM now. And it's hard to people from the outside know who works with who talks to who doesn't work with who. When there's, especially for this permitting program that involves different sections, who do you need to talk to and why? So we can start at the beginning. At the top there, Brian Rocketus is our commissioner. He's in the governor's cabinet. Beneath him are six different offices. Three of those are smaller support offices: the Office of Legal Counsel, the Office of Program, and then the Office of the Chief of Staff. Then there were three large offices: the Office of Air Quality, Water Quality, and then our office, the Office of Land Quality. Again, within those offices, there are multiple branches. The branch we are in is in the permits branch, and Charles's program is in the compliance branch. Both of those branches actually report to the Deputy Assistant Commissioner. So we work closely together. It's a pairing of two different similar branches that work together. Again, within those branches are sections. And what makes this permitting program interesting is because it involves so many different sections. This also makes it a little more complicated. So for this, there's actually three different sections that this can involve just in the permits branch. My section, the solid waste permit section, is also the confined feeding section, and also the permits engineering section, which does a lot of the review. Also is the compliance branch. Involved in these permitting programs is the solid waste compliance section and the CFO compliance section. Also possibly involved is the enforcement section, but that only happens when there's a problem, and we'll go into that. There we go. So we'll get to just the general purpose of the rule. Why does it exist? What is its purpose? It provides conditions for the construction and expansion of biomass facilities. It provides conditions for storage and processing of biomass and appropriate feedstock. I'll go into the difference between those two things in the next slide. And then provides conditions for financial assurance. And if you're not aware of what financial assurance is, it's a range of financial mechanisms that provide IDEM a certain amount of money to clean up a facility. If, let's say, the facility and the people who operate it just decide to one day fly out to Barbados and never come back, what are we going to do with that facility? So during the review of the application, there's a certain amount of money that's determined that if that was to happen, how much would that cost to clean up? And I'm not an expert in all of those different types of financial instruments, but there's a few people in our branch that are. If you want further information about that, but they exist to cover the cost of cleanup should the facility just leave all the waste there. And then there's a permitting program under 329 IEC 11, which is the solid waste permitting program. And it is a larger permitting program for any type of solid waste processing. And the anaerobic digester registration is 11.5. And it's a registration program pulled out of that major 11 full permitting program. So the registration is very similar to a permit. It's a contract with the state, do a certain activity you're permitted to do. but it's maybe a little less onerous. It actually doesn't have a fee, a few small differences. That's the general purpose of this permitting program. And I have to mention, just like all of our permits, any approval is based on the protection of human health and the environment. And I'll start here. This is an important distinction in the rule. It helps determine what type of permit is required. And it's the difference between biomass and appropriate feedstock. A lot of this is straight from the rule, but I can add some context. Biomass is a material derived from living organisms that can grow back, regenerates, and it's useful for producing energy. There's a list of things that fall under that, but the main one is manure. And I've highlighted there. Manure is biomass, of course, a large component of a lot of these digesters. Appropriate feedstock is a segregated solid waste. And I've highlighted that because it is a solid waste. That's what makes it different. It's a solid waste that's segregated from the mainstream of solid waste that would regularly have to go to a landfill or a solid waste processing facility, but it's appropriate for use in a digester because it has value in the digester, boosts energy, but then also has the potential to be land applied safely as a residual at the end. So it is a solid waste, but it's a segregated solid waste because it's appropriate. There's a few examples there. Food waste is a big one, industrial food waste, and then other industrial waste, paper, pulp, sewage, sludge, or off-spec underused animal feed. These need to be approved by IDEM, either in the permit or later on in the submittal, and we review those. We mainly review those for, are they safe in the digester, but more after they go through the digester, can they be land applied safely? Because it's a solid waste that needs to go through the land application program. Okay, after we discuss that, we can now start to figure out what type of permit is needed. And to do that, we have to ask a few questions. Where is the biomass facility located? What type of waste is accepted? And how are the residuals handled? And so I've tried to kind of highlight which section each one of these go in based on how these different rules are housed in these different sections. And this is, again, a little different from our usual permitting programs that have one rule in one section, and then maybe another section that does the compliance for it. It's a little easier to figure out for everybody involved. But this one has 3 of these rules intermingled in different ways. And the first one is that 11.5, which is the biomass registration rule. That's housed in the solid waste permit section. And we also have the land application of biosolids, industrial waste products, and pollutant-bearing water. And the residuals from an anaerobic digester are industrial waste products, if you accept, depending on what you accept. And then also we have the confined feeding section. And they are right next to us at the office. We work closely together, but we are not the same section. Thought I was getting good at that. There you go. Okay, so we can get into some of the situations and figure out which section controls the permitting, what type of permit you'll get. In this situation, we have a facility located within the boundary of a CFO, and it only accepts biomass. And you remember, biomass is manure, all those things, but it's not solid waste. And in this situation, you go just through the CFO program. It's a CFO permit. It's because it's located within the boundary of a CFO, accepts only biomass, and the disposal of the residuals are through the CFO permit conditions itself, and the land application program is not involved. But the construction of the digester is controlled through some of the conditions in 11.5, and the engineers will review the application through that lens. The second scenario is another, again, a facility located within the boundary of a CFO. But in this scenario, they accept biomass and appropriate feedstock. And because appropriate feedstock is a solid waste, as an industrial waste, it now needs to be land applied through the land application program. And this is because, again, located within the boundary of a CFO, accepts biomass or appropriate feedstock. But now the solid waste section is brought in because there's a land application program permit conditions in that permit. And also the digester still, again, has conditions from 11.5. There's another situation, which would be a facility located without a CFO, and it's biomass only. In this situation, CFO is not involved at all. There's no CFO permit. It's just a registration. And this registration is because it's at its own property and it accepts biomass. And I don't think we have anyone that does this currently, but I believe it is an option. And then it goes through the fertilizer rule, which is, I'm not an expert in this rule, but I believe that's the case. I think my other slide is back. There it is. Okay. And this is the fourth situation. So you're, again, located without a CFO, not within the boundaries of a CFO. Maybe it could be next to a CFO, but it's not inside the facility boundary of the confined feeding operation. So there's no confined feeding operation permit. This is solely through the registration program. Because it's located at the property, its own property, but in this situation also takes appropriate feedstock. So again, it's a solid waste and it needs to be land applied through the land application program. So now those are the main situations, and I think there's a few other minor ones that individual cases may be slightly different. So I don't want to give the impression that those are the only things that happen, but in between the margins between all of those, there's a few other situations, like maybe being situated next to a CFO, but then sending your material back instead of sending it out a different way. And there's other options in the rule, but they're just less common. So the permitting process for the registration itself, there's no fee to apply. We do encourage a pre-application meeting in the hopes that it makes things go smoother. It's not always the case, but so we can get in the same room together. The permittee can discuss what they plan to do. Regulators and the engineering staff can say, what are our expectations? What do we need from you? So when we get the application in, things go smoother. There's perhaps fewer questions we have to ask and request for additional information. And that, we have our own goals to go quickly. And I know that the regulated community also wants to go as quickly as possible. So it helps us meet that goal. Then the application itself is reviewed by permits engineering staff and also a little bit by people in our section, but primarily the conditions are reviewed by the engineering staff. And then when the permit's issued, it's 5 years in length, and any modifications to the process, location, amounts of biomass, they require a modification to that permit. I call it a permit, technically a registration, but they're very similar. And I'm not an engineer, but so I'm going to keep this kind of just, these are the things they look at. I don't have much explanation beyond that, but they do look at the screening procedures for biomass and appropriate feedstock. They look at plot plans, construction plans. They'll review the descriptions of how the operation is, what the operation is, descriptions for controlling surface water runoff, leachate, things that maybe don't need to run off the facility, but then also how residuals are handled. Things that's an okay thing to do, but we have to have some control for residuals. They'll go over the contingency plans, and then again, that financial assurance documentation. They'll provide through their analysis how much they think it would cost to clean up. So you have to have that much financial assurance. Goodness. Okay, so the permitting process for the second program in our section is the land application program. And again, this is no fee to apply, but the application is reviewed wholly in our section. There's a few minor things that maybe go to engineering for review, but primarily we have staff in our section that review this completely. They're experts and they can look through it. And then the permit is issued for 5 years, but any renewal generally are 10 years in length, so a little longer permit. And then there's considerations for treatment, residual quality, and where the material will go. Okay. So to elaborate on that a little bit, they could do a full hour, multi-hour presentation about the land application program. I don't think you guys are interested in that, but I can distill it down to mainly 4 questions, I think, to see what do we review when we get a land application permit. And this also goes for biosolids and pollutant-bearing water, but in this case, it's industrial waste products. And first thing we ask is how much can be applied. And we look at nitrogen. So that's maybe a rate-based question because it's a nutrient. It's a good thing for corn, 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We want that, but anything beyond that, too much according to our rules. So that question is how much. So we know what's in there, know it's a good thing, but how much can you apply? The next question is, can the material be applied? And that's a question about the pollutants, the heavy metals, the PCBs. If it's at a certain level, you just can't apply it. So it's a yes or no question. It's not like you have a certain amount of pollutants, that means you could apply a little bit. It's just if it's at a certain level, we have guidance from the EPA, you cannot land apply that. But if you're below it, then you can land apply it. Also, we have to ask, where can the material be applied? And there's two things there. We have site conditions we look at, field conditions. For example, that might be the slope of the field, among other things. And then also we have setbacks and features. And those features can be human features like a house. And you could actually get waivers for those because the people there can give consent to have those setbacks can be smaller. However, the setbacks from environmental features like a stream or a well, they can't consent because they can't sign papers. So that always is the same. And then the final question we ask is, can the material application sites in a GIS layer? So we know over time how much has been land applied and how much pollutant has been land applied. So if it gets to a certain level that is deemed dangerous by guidance from EPA, then that field is retired and cannot be used anymore. And I think they base it off if a child came onto the field and ate some dirt, and in that extreme case, would he still be okay? And so if at that time it's not okay to land apply. So we actually have a whole lot of our fields, if you look through our database, are way under this. Most sites do a good job of keeping their pollutant low. There's a few that do get retired, I think, but most of the fields have a lot of life left. And we have quite a few fields. I don't have an exact number, but a lot. And that's my contact information if you have further questions. And then I'm going to hand it off to Charles.
My intent is just to kind of go over things on how we're implementing the rule out there in the real world. And in Indiana, we have basically 3 operational arrangements for the digester. And these are not defined in any law or rule. These are my definitions. Is we have the standalone, which is that operation, that digester that's out there, not affiliated with anything, takes feedstocks, takes manure. We have 2 of those in the state right now. The other one is an on-site CFO. We have several of those. I'm thinking there's probably 11 or 12 of those out in the state right now. And they're all pretty much manure-based except for the one we're at today. And then there's another one in northern Indiana. And the one that we're at today does take feedstock. So you'll be able to see how they handle those too. Okay, just for reference, Indiana is a little bit different than most states because we have what we call a confined feeding operation rule. It's been around since the 1970s. And we regulate at a much lower number of animals than what the CAPO rule at the federal level would regulate. You can see that they're significantly lower, except for when you get to the poultry. They're probably right at the same level as the poultry. And then we have several duck farms in the state, and we do not have any liquid duct system, so we don't have to worry about the 5,000 ducks. Okay. What we would like you to consider if you come to Indiana to build a digester is, 1, meet with our regulatory group and maybe discuss what you're planning on. Begin a dialogue with us on so we can determine what type of permit you'll need or registration you'll need. Are really going to focus on how you operate. will there be a biomass or feedstock, for instance? That's going to have a big determination on the type of operation or how you handle those particular. Sorry, did it go back on you? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm all right there. Yeah. Anyway. Anyway, how will your operation fit into the multiple rules that you have to deal with? Like I said, like Tom had mentioned, there's basically 3 different rules that you could fit into or together with. Don't forget to also, and when you're speaking to us, don't forget there's other agencies out there that may have some sort of regulatory influence on what you're doing. We have, organic fertilizer program in the state chemist. If you've got generators or you're going to burn a flare to off-gas some of the methane, you want to talk to the air program. And if you plan to maybe discharge some sort of processed wastewater, you may need to talk to the Office of Water Quality also. Okay. On-site CFO, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, what we expect. An on-site CFO is the digester is actually on the defined process area of the CFO. In that case, the CFO compliance program would be your inspecting program of those facilities. All waste management process will need to have approval prior to construction on these sites. So what I'm saying is you wouldn't want to break ground until you've got our approval. Manure only, that's biomass. That's probably the simplest process you could possibly have. You don't have to worry about necessarily management units up front. You may have to consider that when you're dealing with feedstock, just depending on how you're operating your digester. If you're accepting feedstock, then you got to make a decision. Are you going to accept it, store it, and then introduce it to the digester? Or are you going to just introduce it to the digester directly? If you're going to store it up front, you're going to have to permit that regulated unit as part of the CFO. And if you do that, if you accept feedstock and store it up front, it also requires financial assurance. Okay. All right. The standalone digester, it's going to be inspected by the solid waste inspectors. And they're going to look at whether you have proof of financial assurance. Usually that will take place in our office between the permit group and our inspector. You may need a satellite manure storage structure, which is a sub-regulation of the CFO rule. That is an impoundment where you might send your digestate when it processes through the digester. And you may require one up front if you choose to store manure up front at a standalone. You may have specific requirements for feedstocks if you choose to accept feedstocks. I think the one that we have in the state that I'm most familiar with, they do accept feedstocks and store those feedstocks up front, so they had to go through a construction review process on that particular unit. storage approvals will require PE certification. And if you're digesting a feedstock, you're going to have to run those feedstocks through the solid waste group that reviews the feedstocks. And they'll give you an idea of what you need to do. That feedstock, then that digest state will become regulated under the 327 IAC 6.1 rule for land application. If you're just straight manure, that land application can be conducted through normal CFO standards. Oh, I think I went through that already. Okay. All right, co-located CFOs. This is a unique term, I guess, in that we allow a digester, investment group owner, operator to purchase or lease land adjacent to the CFO. This is a little bit different than maybe most states might allow. I know there's a lot of debate around the US on this. Indiana has legally determined that this is possible. And I think we're seeing a lot of digesters right now coming through the registration process that fit into this category. What it is that they're constructing the digester on this parcel property adjacent to the operation area of the CFO. And then they'll, from what I've seen, they'll hard pipe the manure from the lagoon into the digester. Then once the digester's finished its cycle, that digestate will return to the storage on the CFO, and then the CFO will manage that as a manure application. Probably one of the biggest things of concern from our program standpoint is, will these digesters eventually start accepting feedstocks? Right now, we don't really see that. It could happen in the future, so that will start triggering the 327 IAC 6.1 feedstock regulations and require that those feedstocks be stored in regulated units if you're storing it directly up front. The digest state is a different problem because you're adding to the volume that you would be taking from the CFO. And then the CFO would need to probably increase their volume of capacity because that lagoon at the CFO has been sized according to the number of animals at that facility. So if you're adding anything to it, that means that that volume will be jeopardized. In most cases, the digester will follow the digester registration rules. They'll be inspected by a solid waste inspector. The CFO side, however, will still be in the CFO program being inspected by a CFO. Our plans is to do joint inspections on that. And if the digester accepts a feedstock, then they'll have to, the CFO will have to follow any of the solid waste land application standards in 327 IAC 6.1. I'm kind of jumping around here, but I'm trying to save time. So okay, if the digester determines they don't want to send that feedstock utilized digestate back to the CFO, then they'll probably end up having to look into the solid waste or the satellite manure storage system rule to store that. As far as I know, that's the standard that the permit program has decided would fit that situation. Okay, and lastly, oh, I went back. No, I'm back. I've kind of jumped through. Okay, lastly, there's our contact information. Two people I do want to recognize here that's with us from the department is Brenda Stepanoff. She handles a lot of the feedstock questions and evaluations. And then our new ag liaison, Megan Estinda. And she's a good place to start if you don't want to approach the permit group or the compliance group on questions. She can take your questions, and she's our technical expert for assisting regulated facilities. She has to hold herself to confidentiality. So even if you would ask for a question, she has to come talk to me. She can't tell me who it is, but I can give her the answer based on whatever scenario she presents. It's worthwhile talking to her. Plus, she can arrange she can help arrange meeting with us to discuss any issues also. And do you have any questions?